My name is Eliza. For 15 years, I was a hospice nurse. It's a strange profession, one that demands a quiet heart and steady hands. You spend your days walking alongside people at the very edge of their lives, bearing witness to their last breaths, their final regrets, and the love that endures even when the body fails. I thought I understood family, its intricate knots of duty, resentment, and fierce, unshakable loyalty. I thought I knew how to hold space for pain. I was wrong. My own family was a lesson I had yet to learn. I live in Oak Haven, a small town nestled in a valley where the fog clings to the pines until mid-morning and everyone knows whose car is parked in front of whose house. It was a good place to raise my children, Clara and Sam. Life was a predictable rhythm. My 12-hour shifts at the hospice, Sam's soccer practice, Clara's violin lessons. It was a small, carefully constructed world of order and love, a fortress I had built against the chaos I'd grown up with. The chaos mostly had a name: Leo. My brother, Leo, is 2 years younger than me, but in the landscape of our family, he has always been the child. At 32, he possessed a boy's charm and a boy's inability to face the consequences of his actions. He was a ghost in his own life, flitting between borrowed apartments and my parents' spare room, sustained by their hope and their money. Addiction was the heavy cloak he wore, and my parents, in their desperate love, kept trying to adjust it for him, never asking him to take it off. They saw a sickness, I saw a series of choices. This was the fundamental fracture in our family, the fault line we all pretended not to feel trembling beneath our feet. The night it all began to crumble, I came home smelling of antiseptic and the faint, sweet scent of the lavender oil I use for my patients. The air in the house was still and quiet. Clara, my 10-year-old, had performed her first solo at the winter recital. Her small body had stood so straight on the stage, her chin tucked into her violin, the notes of a simple folk tune filling the school auditorium. I still felt the echo of that pride humming in my chest. I walked into my bedroom to put away the small velvet box containing the only real treasures I owned. The box was on my dresser, open and empty. For a moment, I didn't understand. I just stared at the hollowed-out silk lining. Then a cold dread, heavy and slow as a river stone, settled in my stomach. My grandmother's heirlooms. Her locket, a silver oval worn smooth with time, containing a faded, postage stamp-sized photo of my grandfather in his army uniform. His signet ring, the gold so soft it felt like butter against the skin. And her pearls, the ones she'd worn on her wedding day, promised to Clara, the eldest granddaughter. They were worth perhaps $25,000, but that monetary value was a ghost. Their real worth was in the stories they held, in the hands that had touched them, in the continuity of a family history I desperately wanted my children to feel a part of. I sank onto the edge of my bed and closed my eyes, piecing it together. Leo had been at the house that morning. He'd come for the Sunday breakfast that had become a weekly ritual of quiet tension. He'd looked thin, his eyes too bright, his hands restless. He'd asked for a loan for a deposit on a new place, his voice laced with the brittle optimism he always affected when he was lying. I had said no, gently but firmly. My parents had watched me, their faces a familiar mixture of disappointment and resentment. I was the one with the steady job, the mortgage, the responsible life. I was the one who could afford to be generous. I was the one who wouldn't. An hour later, I was standing outside his latest apartment, a grim, low-slung building on the edge of town. The air smelled of wet pavement and despair. I knocked, and when he opened the door, the confirmation was immediate. He was wearing our grandfather's signet ring on his pinky finger. It hung loosely, a relic on a hand that had never done a day of hard work. The apartment was barely furnished. A mattress on the floor, a television glowing with the frantic energy of a video game, and takeout containers breeding colonies of mold on the countertop. "You need to give them back, Leo," I said. My voice was quiet, stripped of anger. All I felt was a profound and hollow sadness. He didn't look at me. He just shrugged, his eyes fixed on the screen. "It's fine, Eliza. I'm sure you have insurance. It's just stuff." "It's not just stuff. It's Grandma's. It's for Clara." I tried to appeal to the part of him I remembered, the little boy who had cried when he'd broken my favorite doll. Clara can get new pearls, he scoffed, a flicker of his old resentment surfacing. You can buy her a whole store of them with your fancy nursing money. He gestured around the squalid room. What about me? Don't I deserve a chance? This is for my recovery, Eliza. It's life or death. He was using the language of recovery as a weapon, a shield. He'd learned the words in his last court-mandated rehab, but he hadn't absorbed the meaning. I looked at the ring on his finger, a symbol of a man's integrity and service, now just a commodity to be traded for his next fix. The smell of something chemical and sharp, a smell I knew from my work with addicts, caught in the back of my throat. I turned and left without another word. There was nothing more to say. My parents' house was my next stop. I knew what was coming, but I went anyway, driven by some foolish, lingering hope that this time, they would see. My mother opened the door before I could even knock. Her face was a mask of fury. Leo called us, she said, her voice trembling. He told us you went to his apartment and threatened him. How could you, Eliza? After everything he's been through? He's trying to get his life together. My father stood behind her, his arms crossed. He didn't look at me. He looked at a spot on the wall just past my shoulder, his jaw tight with disappointment. The boy is fragile right now, he said, his voice low and rumbling. He's in recovery. You can't just go kicking him when he's down. He stole from me, I said, my voice barely a whisper. He stole Grandma's heirlooms. From my house. From Clara. My mother waved a dismissive hand. It's just things, Eliza. Things can be replaced. Your brother can't be. She stepped forward, her eyes pleading. You need to be the bigger person here. You need to apologize to him. For his sake. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. It wasn't a snap, but a slow, quiet turning, like a key in a lock that had been rusted shut for years. I had spent my entire life being the bigger person, the responsible one, the anchor in the storm of Leo's making. I had absorbed their disappointment, their worry, their misplaced anger. I had carried the weight of my brother's failures as if they were my own. But standing there, on the porch of the house I grew up in, I realized that my support wasn't helping him. It was enabling him. My compassion had become a crutch they all leaned on, allowing them to avoid the painful truth of his reality and their role in it. The best way to support his recovery, I realized with a startling, cold clarity, was to let him feel the full, unmitigated weight of his own choices. I would support him all the way to rock bottom. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just nodded, a strange calm settling over me. You're right, I said. I'll take care of it. I turned and walked back to my car, leaving them standing in the doorway, their faces softening with relief. They thought I had finally understood. And I had. Just not in the way they imagined. The next 2 weeks were a strange pilgrimage. I took a leave of absence from work, telling my supervisor only that I had a pressing family matter. I started with a map and a 50-mile radius, and I visited every pawn shop, every dingy "we buy gold" establishment I could find. In the first shop, I found the locket. The man behind the counter, a tired-looking guy with ink-stained fingers, remembered Leo. Said it was his ex-wife's, he mumbled, pushing the locket across the counter after I paid 3 times what he'd given my brother. I held it in my palm, its familiar weight a small comfort. Some pieces were harder to find. The pearls had already been sold. Using the pawn shop's records, I tracked the buyer to a suburb an hour away. I knocked on a stranger's door, a woman with kind eyes who was planning to give them to her own daughter for her graduation. I explained the situation, my voice steady, my story simple and unadorned. I didn't mention addiction or theft. I just spoke of my grandmother and of my daughter, Clara. I offered her double what she paid. She looked at the pearls, then at my face, and sold them back to me for the original price. Some things belong where they belong, she said, pressing the box into my hand. Piece by piece, I bought back my family's history. It cost me nearly all of my savings, the money I'd carefully set aside for a new roof and for the children's future. With every transaction, I felt not anger, but a growing sense of resolve. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. It was about drawing a boundary not in the sand, but in solid stone. The annual family holiday dinner was 2 weeks later at my parents' house. It was a strained affair, the air thick with unspoken words. Aunts, uncles, cousins, the whole Oakhaven clan was there, pretending everything was normal. Leo was the guest of honor, freshly showered and wearing a new shirt my mother had bought him. He was performing sobriety, playing the part of the redeemed son. I waited until dessert was served, when the clinking of forks had subsided and a lull fell over the table. I stood up, holding a small, beautifully wrapped box. I didn't tap a glass. I didn't raise my voice. "Leo," I said, my voice clear and calm in the sudden silence. Every head turned towards me. "I have something for you." I walked around the table and placed the box in front of him. He looked at me, his eyes wide with confusion. "What's this?" "Open it," I said gently. With trembling fingers, he untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of fresh velvet, lay our grandmother's locket, our grandfather's ring, and the strand of wedding pearls, all professionally cleaned and restored. The silence in the room was absolute, so deep you could hear the hum of the refrigerator. Leo's face went from pale to a deep, mottled red. He looked up at me, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. He was trapped. He couldn't explode, not here. Not in front of everyone. My Aunt Linda, never one for subtlety, leaned forward. "Eliza, darling, what's all this?" "I thought those were stolen." I kept my eyes on Leo. "They were," I said, my voice still even. Leo had a moment of desperation and pawned them. I know how important family history is to him, so I spent the last 2 weeks and my entire savings to track them all down and buy them back for him. I wanted to make sure they stayed in the family. The dam of polite denial broke. Whispers erupted around the table. Uncle Rob started muttering about the cost of rehab. A cousin shook his head, looking from Leo to my parents with dawning comprehension. My mother's face was ashen. My father stared at his plate as if it held the secrets of the universe. For the first time, the consequences of Leo's actions weren't a private burden for me or my parents to bear. They were laid bare on the dining room table for everyone to see. I hadn't shamed him with anger. I had illuminated the truth with a quiet, undeniable act of consequence. I felt a strange, sad sort of peace. The fortress I had built for my children now had a clearly marked gate, and I was the one who would decide who could enter. On the drive home, however, the quiet victory felt hollow. Had I done it for myself to prove a point? Or had I done it for him? A part of me, the hospice nurse, the sister, the fixer, still ached with a sense of responsibility. Drawing a boundary was one thing, abandoning him was another. The guilt was a familiar, heavy coat. The next morning, I made a decision. I drove to his apartment. He was hungover and sullen, the shame from the night before radiating from him like heat. "I found a place for you," I said, handing him a brochure. It was for a 90-day inpatient program, one of the best in the state. It wasn't a punishment, it was a real facility, with doctors, therapists, and even equine therapy. It cost a staggering amount of money I now had to borrow against my home's equity. "I'll pay for it. I'll drive you there. But this is it, Leo. This is the last time. After this, you're on your own." He stared at me, his eyes filling with tears of what I desperately wanted to believe was gratitude. I drove him there myself, a 3-hour journey through rolling hills. I visited him every Sunday, making the 6-hour round trip without fail. I sat in on family therapy sessions where the counselors praised my healthy boundaries and my tough love. The more they praised me, the more Leo's jaw tightened. He was clean, he was following the program, but a new kind of resentment was taking root in him, something colder and sharper than before. I was no longer just the successful sister. I was the architect of his forced sobriety, the saintly figure he was measured against. Still, I allowed myself to hope. When he was discharged after 90 days, he looked different. Clear-eyed, healthier. But the warmth was gone. He was like a house where all the lights had been turned off. Life in Oakhaven returned to its gentle rhythm, but with a new, dissonant undercurrent. I'd see Leo's battered car parked down the street from my house at odd hours. I'd catch a glimpse of it near Clara's school when I went to pick her up. He knew my schedule. He knew when I was at work, when I was home. It was unsettling, but I told myself it was part of his process, his awkward re-entry into the world. He had never been violent. He adored Clara and Sam. I couldn't imagine he would ever do anything to hurt them, or me, in a way that truly mattered. 3 weeks later, it was the night of Clara's school's spring concert. She had a small speaking part in a play about woodland creatures, and she was vibrating with excitement. She sat in the passenger seat, a vision in a brown felt squirrel costume I had painstakingly stitched together, her face painted with whiskers. Sam was in the back, complaining about having to go but secretly proud of his sister. I pulled into the school parking lot, the evening sun casting long shadows across the asphalt. I was helping Clara with her seatbelt when the world exploded. It wasn't a sound, but a sudden, blinding bath of light. Headlights, spotlights, flashing red and blue strobes painting the inside of my car in frantic, terrifying strokes. A voice, amplified and inhuman, boomed through a megaphone. "Hands where I can see them. Step away from the vehicle." My blood ran cold. Men in dark uniforms and heavy vests were swarming my minivan, their weapons drawn and pointed at us. At me. At my children. Clara started screaming, a high, thin sound of pure terror. I tried to shield her, to tell her it was a mistake, but a hand grabbed my arm and yanked me from the car. The rough asphalt scraped my knees as they forced me to the ground. Sam was crying in the back seat, panicked, choking sobs. "Mommy!" Clara shrieked, her voice breaking. "What's happening to Mommy?" My face was pressed into the gravel, the sharp stones digging into my cheek. I could smell gasoline and dust. Through the chaos, I saw them lead a drug-sniffing dog to the trunk of my van. The dog went straight to a side panel, barking frantically. An officer pried it open, revealing a hidden compartment I never knew existed. He pulled out 3 small, plastic-wrapped packages of white powder. As the cold metal of handcuffs bit into my wrists, my gaze swept the edge of the parking lot. And I saw him. Leo. Sitting in his car, parked under the deep shade of an oak tree. He was just watching, his face impassive, his phone held up to record the entire scene. He was making sure his anonymous tip had paid off exactly as planned. He had supported me, too, all the way to my own rock bottom. He started his car and drove away, a ghost disappearing into the twilight. The ride to the station was a blur of flashing lights and my children's terror. Clara, my brave, terrified little girl, had started to sing. It was a song from her music class, a little round about sunshine and bluebirds, but her voice was broken with sobs, the melody a fractured prayer. Her squirrel costume, which had seemed so sweet and innocent minutes before, now looked like a tragic disguise. Sam had gone silent, his face pale, his eyes wide with a horror no 9-year-old should ever know. At the Oak Haven Police Department, a place I'd only ever been for a charity bake sale, 2 women from Child Protective Services were waiting. They had kind, tired faces and clipboards that felt like weapons. They spoke in low, soothing tones as they led my children away. Clara reached for me, her small hand outstretched, her song finally dissolving into hiccuping sobs. "Mommy," was the last thing I heard her say before a door closed between us. The officer at the booking desk was Tom Riley. He'd been a year ahead of Leo in high school. I remembered him from football games. His face fell when he saw me. "Eliza," he said, his voice low. "What's going on?" He processed my fingerprints with a professional detachment that couldn't quite hide his shock. They gave me 1 phone call. I dialed my parents' number, my fingers trembling so badly I had to try 3 times. It rang and rang, finally clicking over to the answering machine. My father's gruff voice filled the receiver. "Leave a message." "Mom, Dad, it's Eliza," I sobbed, the words catching in my throat. "I've been arrested." "It's not true." "None of it is true. I think. I know Leo planted something in my car. Please, you have to get the kids from CPS. Please, just call me back. Please." The machine cut me off. I spent the next few hours in a holding cell that smelled of bleach and regret. My court-appointed lawyer arrived just after midnight. He was young, his suit a little too big, his eyes full of a weary sympathy that offered no comfort. He spread the police report on the metal table between us. The amount they found, plus the location, a school zone, moves this into a different category. Eliza, he explained, his voice gentle. We're not talking about a slap on the wrist. We're looking at trafficking charges. There are mandatory minimums. Decades. He didn't say the word, but it hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. The life I knew, my children, my home, my career, my freedom was gone. And in its place was this new, terrifying reality. I was no longer Eliza, the hospice nurse, Clara, and Sam's mother. I was a defendant. I was an inmate number. And my brother, the architect of my destruction, was out there, playing the part of the concerned family member, the hero waiting in the wings to save my children from their monstrous mother. Lying on the cold metal bunk that night, I thought about the nature of caregiving. I had spent my career easing pain, offering comfort, holding hands in the dark. But there is a darkness that no amount of compassion can illuminate. I had tried to save my brother from his demons, and in the end, he had simply handed them to me. The clock was ticking, and for the first time in my life, I had no idea how to stop it. The days that followed bled into one another, a monotonous gray landscape of institutional procedure and creeping dread. My bail hearing was a formality. Given the nature of the charges, possession with intent to distribute in a school zone, and my apparent risk to the community, bail was denied. The gavel fell with a sound like a door slamming shut on my life. Back in my cell, I met my new cellmate, Maria. She was a woman in her 50s, her face a roadmap of hard living, doing 6 months for forging prescriptions. She took one look at me, still in the clothes I'd worn to my daughter's concert, and shook her head. First time? She asked, not unkindly. I nodded, unable to speak. Let me guess, she said, her voice raspy. Your car, but not your stuff. A boyfriend? An ex? A brother? I stared at her, shocked. My brother. She let out a short, bitter laugh. Classic. The plant job. They get you with your own property, your own trust. The system doesn't care who put it there, honey. It only cares whose name is on the registration. My first video visitation was a carefully staged piece of theater. My parents sat on their familiar floral sofa, Clara and Sam wedged between them. And behind them, hovering just at the edge of the screen, was Leo. He'd positioned himself as the supportive uncle, the rock in this terrible storm. Eliza, honey, my mother began, her voice strained. The counselors at Leo's rehab, they warned us this might happen. Addiction is a disease of denial. Mom, I'm not on drugs, I pleaded, my voice cracking. I have never. It's okay, she said, cutting me off with a wave of her hand, her eyes filled with a pained, pitying look that was worse than anger. We'll get you help. We'll all get through this. Leo leaned forward slightly, just enough for the camera to catch his expression. His face was a mask of sorrowful concern, but his eyes were cold, triumphant. He was finally the good son. The responsible one. Clara was silent. She just stared at the screen, her eyes huge and lost in her pale face. Sam wouldn't look at me at all. He just picked at a loose thread on the sofa cushion. The 15-minute call ended with my mother promising to take good care of the children until you're well again. The blows came swiftly after that. A certified letter from the hospital informed me I was suspended without pay, pending the outcome of the investigation. The morals clause in my contract was clear. Another letter, from the state nursing board, notified me that my license was under review. The career I had spent 15 years building was dissolving like sand through my fingers. My best friend, Sarah, came to visit, her eyes red and puffy. David, my husband, he doesn't want me getting involved, she whispered, slipping a folded piece of paper into my hand. But you need to know. Leo has been telling everyone he needs access to your bank accounts to pay for the kids' expenses. I've changed all the passwords I could think of. The note was a list of my own life, now locked away from me. At the bottom, she'd written, "He's a hero, Eliza. In town, he's a hero for stepping up." The local news ran a story, local nurse arrested in school drug bust. It featured my mugshot, a grainy, hollow-eyed portrait of a woman I didn't recognize. The online comments were a torrent of vitriol. Parents from Clara's school, neighbors I'd waved to for years, strangers, they all had an opinion. Disgusting. Putting children at risk. I hope they lock her up and throw away the key. And then, a comment from Leo under his own name. Addiction is a terrible disease that tears families apart. We are praying for my sister's recovery and focusing on the children's well-being. Please respect our privacy during this difficult time. It had over 100 likes. He wasn't just destroying me, he was building his redemption story on my ruins. The family court hearing for temporary custody was the final, brutal act of my undoing. I appeared via a grainy video feed from the jail, wearing an orange jumpsuit that felt like a costume for a role I never auditioned for. Leo was there in person, dressed in a clean, pressed shirt, his hands folded calmly in his lap. He had an attorney. My parents testified on his behalf, their voices choked with emotion as they spoke of their daughter's sudden, shocking downfall and Leo's brave decision to step in and provide a stable home for his niece and nephew. The judge, a woman with a kind face and tired eyes, granted them temporary custody. It was in the best interests of the children, she said. I watched my brother's face on the monitor. He didn't smirk. He simply nodded, a quiet, somber expression on his face. He had won. He had taken my children, my home, my career, my name. And he had done it so masterfully that everyone was applauding him for it. Back in my cell, I finally broke. The silent, steady fortress I had built inside myself crumbled, and I sobbed, deep, ragged breaths that scraped my throat raw. Maria sat on her bunk, giving me space. After a long while, when my tears had subsided into shuddering breaths, she spoke. The first rule of a frame job, she said, her voice low and steady, is that they always frame you for the one thing no one would ever believe you'd do. The good mother becomes a child endangerment risk. The honest accountant becomes an embezzler. The sober nurse becomes a drug dealer. She paused, letting the words sink in. It's effective because it's so unbelievable that it has to be true. People love a fallen angel. She was right. My life had been my alibi, and he had turned it into the motive. My strength, my independence, my quiet competence, he had used it all against me. The question is, Maria continued, leaning forward, her dark eyes intense, what are you going to do about it? You can lie here and let them turn you into a ghost. Or you can start fighting. But you better decide soon. Because out there, that clock is ticking. Those kids are growing up. And stories, once they're told enough times, have a way of becoming the truth. I wiped my face on the rough, starchy sleeve of my jumpsuit. The truth. My truth felt like a fragile, flickering candle in the face of the hurricane he had created. But it was all I had left. I had to find a way to make it burn bright enough for someone to see. For my children to see. The fight began in the jail's law library, a small, stuffy room with outdated books and a single, painfully slow computer. I spent every allotted hour I had, my head swimming with legal terms I didn't understand. I traded commissary items, instant coffee, ramen noodles, with Maria for her paralegal insights. Look for the seams, she'd advise. Every lie has a seam. You just have to pull the right thread. The first thread appeared in a box of discovery from my public defender. It was a receipt from an auto body shop on the other side of the county, dated 2 weeks before my arrest. It was for the installation of a custom storage compartment. The owner of the shop, I learned after a desperate call to Sarah, was a known associate of Leo's from his darker days. It was a thread, but a thin one. My lawyer was skeptical. He could say it was a gift for you. Hard to prove intent. The next thread came from a place I never expected. My uncle, my father's brother, was the county sheriff. He had avoided me since the arrest, a silence that hurt more than my parents' accusations. One evening, he appeared at the jail, not as a visitor, but as a man burdened by his conscience. He sat across from me in the sterile visitation booth. I pulled the GPS data from Leo's car off the record, he said, his voice low, avoiding my eyes. He was at that auto body shop. And he drove past your house 12 times in the week leading up to your arrest. Always late at night. He finally looked at me, his own eyes full of a weary pain. I know, Eliza. I know he did this. But my hands are tied. Investigating family, in a town this small, It would destroy everything. He couldn't help me officially, but he did something else. He quietly paid for a private investigator, a retired state trooper with a bulldog jaw and an allergy to nonsense. Meanwhile, Leo's public persona flourished. His blog, Oakhaven Overcomer, was a local sensation. He wrote movingly about generational trauma, the disease of addiction, and the sacred duty of family. He posted photos of Clara and Sam at the park, at the ice cream shop, smiling for the camera. To the world, he was a saint. During our supervised video calls, I could see the change in my children. They were quieter, more reserved. Clara had stopped talking about her violin. Sam answered my questions with one-word answers. They were being cared for, fed, clothed. But the light in their eyes was dimming. The private investigator, Mr. Davies, started finding more threads. He found the woman who had bought my grandmother's pearls, and she agreed to sign an affidavit about our conversation. He uncovered records showing Leo had drained my emergency fund, the one I'd told him about years ago, using an online password he must have guessed. He was building a picture, piece by piece, of a meticulous, calculated plan. The turning point came when Davies investigated my work computer. He discovered that in the month before my arrest, someone had used my login credentials to access the hospital's pharmacy system, specifically looking up disposal protocols for controlled substances. The IP address traced back to a public library computer at a time when I was verifiably on shift at the hospice. The trial date was set. My public defender, overwhelmed by a caseload of 40 other desperate people, advised me to take a plea bargain. You plead to simple possession, you'll get time served and probation. You'll have a record, but you'll be out. You can see your kids. And what happens to them? I asked, my voice flat. They spend the rest of their lives believing their mother is a drug addict who lied about their uncle? He had no answer. I refused the plea. We were going to trial. The day of the trial, the courtroom was packed. It felt like the whole of Oakhaven was there to watch the final act of my public destruction. My parents sat behind the prosecutor's table, their faces grim. Leo sat with them, his arm around my mother's shoulder. He looked me in the eye, his expression one of deep, sorrowful pity. The prosecutor painted me as a desperate, overworked nurse who had cracked under pressure, a fallen angel. They presented the evidence, the drugs in my car, in a school zone, my children present. It was a simple, damning story. Then it was our turn. My lawyer, armed with Davies's meticulous research, began to pull at the seams. He presented the receipt for the hidden compartment. He called the pawn shop owner. He put the kind woman who'd bought the pearls on the stand. He showed the jury the IP address records from the library, proving I couldn't have been the one researching drug disposal protocols. With each new piece of evidence, I could feel a subtle shift in the room. Doubt began to creep in, a quiet weed in the prosecutor's well-tended garden of certainty. The final witness was Leo. He walked to the stand, the picture of a pained, reluctant witness. He spoke of his love for me, his struggles with addiction, his fear for my well-being. He cried. His tears were so convincing that even I felt a flicker of the old, familiar pity. My lawyer began his cross-examination gently. He asked about the heirlooms. Leo admitted to borrowing them in a moment of weakness. He asked about the money from my account. Leo claimed it was to buy things for the children. Then, my lawyer produced the GPS data from Leo's car. "Mr. Williams," he said, his voice sharp and clear. "Can you explain to the jury why your car was parked outside your sister's house for hours at a time, in the middle of the night, in the week before her arrest?" Leo stammered. I was worried about her. I was checking on her. Checking on her from the street? For 12 nights. The seam was unraveling. The jury was watching him now, their expressions hardening. He began to contradict himself, his story shifting and changing under the calm, relentless pressure of the questions. The confident, articulate man from the blog posts was gone, replaced by a cornered, desperate liar. The jury was out for 4 hours. It was the longest 4 hours of my life. When they filed back in, their faces were unreadable. I held my breath, my hands clenched so tight my knuckles were white. "On the charge of possession with intent to distribute," the foreman said, his voice echoing in the silent room, "we find the defendant, not guilty. A gasp went through the courtroom. I felt the air rush out of my lungs. On the lesser charge of simple possession, he continued, we find the defendant not guilty. It was over. The lie had collapsed. I dropped my head into my hands and wept, not with joy, but with the sheer, bone-deep exhaustion of having survived. The aftermath was not a triumphant victory parade. It was quiet, messy, and complicated. The family court, presented with the trial transcripts, immediately reversed the custody order. The children came home. But they were not the same children I had lost. Clara was afraid of sirens. Sam had angry outbursts he couldn't explain. The squirrel costume was hidden in the back of a closet. We had all been wounded, and the scars were deep. My parents never apologized. In their minds, they had been trying to save one child, and the story had simply gotten away from them. Our relationship is now a thing of careful, polite distances. My nursing license was reinstated after a lengthy review, but I couldn't go back to the hospice. The memories were too sharp. I work as a school nurse now in a different town. I hand out bandages and ice packs, and I listen to the small, everyday hurts of children. It is a quieter, gentler form of healing. Leo disappeared. After the verdict, he checked out of my parents' house and left a note saying he was going to find himself. I hear whispers of him sometimes, a sighting in a city a few states away, a rumor of another stint in rehab. He is a ghost again. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and my children are sleeping soundly in their beds, I take out the old velvet box. I hold the locket, the ring, the pearls. They are not just objects anymore. They are reminders. They remind me that love, without truth, is a cage. That support, without accountability, is a poison. And that sometimes, the most compassionate thing you can do for someone is to let them go and to save yourself. Clara has started playing the violin again. Her music is hesitant, still, but it is there. It fills our small, quiet house with a sound that is not quite joy, but something more resilient. It is the sound of hope. It is the sound of us, slowly, painstakingly, finding our way back.